A very warm welcome to Florence, where I live. My name is Kate Bolton-Porciatti, and today I'd like to share with you some of the seraphic and varied viewpoints on this beautiful city from a selection of different venues, both within the city centre and from the hills around, and which we'll be visiting during the Academy Travel tour of Florence and Tuscany that's planned for May and June next year. Well, first of all, I'd like to begin with a most unusual view of Florence's most iconic building, the Duomo. And during our tour next year, we'll actually be climbing up to the terraces that run some 100 feet up around the north and south sides of the Duomo. And you can see the walkway to the north here, which affords not only expansive views over the northern part of the city of Florence, but also to the hills beyond, as well as wonderful close-up details of the Duomo itself and of the Great Dome as well. So this is really a fascinating and unique visit. And as you walk round to the front, you then go inside the Duomo, where you can see my cursor is, and you walk inside in front of the great rose window there. And from that viewpoint, you have a bird's eye view down into the Duomo there, and you can really appreciate the scale of the building and the beautiful geometric marble floors below you. Then the terrace runs to the south side of the cathedral, which again gives these spectacular views across the city. This is what you look towards. You can see the Basilica Church of Santa Croce over here. You can see Palazzo della Signoria here, and of course you can see the verdant hills all around you. Another place that we'll be visiting during our tour next year is the city's oldest surviving church. It's the Basilica of San Miniato al Monte, which was founded in 1018. Well, San Miniato al Monte dominates the Mons Regis, the sacred kingly hill to the southeast of the city. And you can imagine from up here, you really do get magical views down onto Florence. This, for instance, is from the entrance gates of San Miniato onto that view with its domes and spires. It never looks quite real, I think. And inside the church are beautifully preserved medieval frescoes, panel paintings, mosaics, stone intarsia, inlay work. There's also a perfect Renaissance chapel with some beautiful sculptures. In short, it really is one of the great sights of Florence. Or maybe one of the nicest times of year, I think, to visit Florence is May and early June, when our tour is planned next year. And certainly in May, the gardens of Florence, the Boboli Gardens and the Bardini Gardens, really are at their very best. The Boboli Gardens lie behind Palazzo Pitti. They are the largest gardens in the city, and they stretch up the hill to the Belvedere Fortress. And you can see in this photograph that they're a mix of formal Renaissance Italian gardens with more natural, freer areas of woodland. This is Lunette, of the Boboli Gardens, painted in 1599 by Giusto Utens, and they show us how the gardens were originally laid out in the 16th century. So you can see Palazzo Pitti here as it was in 1599. You can see the gardens at this stage were rigorously geometric. They were laid out according to geometric principles. And so they're of interest from a historic point of view, as well as an aesthetic one. The sunken area here was formerly a stone quarry, where the stone for Palazzo Pitti was quarried indeed. And it was subsequently turned into an open-air amphitheatre. And you can see the amphitheatre there, loosely based on Greek-Roman amphitheatres and used for multimedia spectacles and entertainments. Well, the Boboli Gardens are typical of the Italian-style gardens, with their mix of box, parterre, of evergreen trees like cypress trees, olives, holm oak trees, as well as statues, fountains, lakes, all making a lovely interplay between water and stone and foliage. And these are the views onto Florence that you get as you climb up the gardens. This is from one of the little lakes in the Boboli Gardens. And after that, you rise up to this lovely panoramic terrace. This is the Giardino del Cavaliere, which in turn overlooks the Florentine hills and across to San Miniato al Monte, in fact. Now, adjacent to the Boboli Gardens are the very elegant Bardini Gardens. These stretch up the hillside from the San Niccolò neighborhood of Florence. And as you can see, the Bardini Gardens feature these lovely, lush, lawned slopes, terraces, long flights of steps that are edged with statues. And from the various terraces, you have windows onto the city below, beautifully framed with flowers and foliage and pergolas. And there are various little belvederes and nooks that look down onto different aspects of the city. It really is a most beautiful sight. One of the loveliest aspects of the Bardini Gardens is this wisteria-draped pergola, absolutely ravishing in May. And from the slopes again, you have these expansive views over the River Arno to the north bank of the city and again to the hills beyond. At the top of the gardens, there's this panoramic terrace edged with elegant statues. And here too, there is a little cafe under a lovely Renaissance loggia. So this is a delightful spot, I think, for a glass of wine or coffee. And hopefully we'll share something together from this loggia during the tour next year. We'll also be heading up into the hills to the north of Florence to visit the charming hill towns of Fiesole and Settignano. Fiesole is known as the balcony of Florence. It's a little hill town around 8 kilometers to the northeast of the city. And indeed, you look up to it from certain vantage points from the city centre. Here, for instance, we're looking up to Fiesole, which cascades down that hill and then rises up the adjacent hill of Monte Ceceri. Well, Fiesole is actually far more ancient than Florence. Fiesole was first settled by the ancient Etruscans and then later conquered by the Romans when it became a prestigious Tuscan town. And to get a taste of its antiquity, We'll visit the archaeological site, which has some ancient Etruscan remains from the 6th century BC. There's an Etruscan temple there, but it also has some well-preserved Roman remains, particularly the ancient Roman theatre, which is still used in the summer months, actually, for plays and concerts and cinema under the stars and so on, and which in turn overlooks the beautiful hills to the north of Florence and gives us a very different aspect, I think, to our various vantage points of Florence. Now, for a picturesque walk, and again for panoramic views, we can take the Via di San Francesco, a little street named after St. Francis of Assisi, pretty stone paved pedestrianized street. And from halfway up the Via di San Francesco, you can sit and contemplate these elevated views across all of Florence. And again, you can see Florence clasped by the encircling hills. Well, at the very top of the Via di San Francesco, we reach what was probably the ancient Etruscan Acropolis. And today there is a little Franciscan monastery and a museum there. And so again, another delightful place to visit. Not far from Fiesole is the little village of Settignano. And the main reason to visit Settignano, I think, is to while away a few blissful hours at the Villa Gamberaia, which you see here with its distinctive gardens and the water-filled parterres that run to the side of the villa there. Well, in her book on Italian villas and their gardens, Edith Wharton sees the Villa Gamberaia as probably the most perfect example, even in Italy, of great effect on small scale. And indeed, these gardens really are one of the gems of Tuscany. There you can see these striking water-filled parterres that in turn overlook Florence to the Tuscan hills around. And all this certainly makes its effect. You can see the villa and the gardens here, and you can see how beautifully they converse with the natural landscape beyond. And here too, as in the Bobley Gardens, there's a lovely interplay between stone, foliage and water, and between geometry and freedom. There's a balance of sunny and shady areas. These were very deliberately planned, of course, to take advantage of the changing seasons and the changing light. And so you have outdoor rooms and corridors, as it were. Here you can see the little grotto with musicians serenading us, bosky areas where it's cooler. And again, here you can see the statues of the gardens overlooking those ravishing views. So a visit to the Villa Gamberaia is really one of the most sensory experiences, I think, that we can enjoy in Florence. One of the particular beauties of these gardens is that they've been relatively little changed since the Renaissance. And so they really do give us quite an authentic taste of an Italian Renaissance garden. Well, of course, one of the delightful pleasures of being in Italy is to enjoy an aperitivo. That's to say a glass of Prosecco or an Aperol Spritz or a Martini or a Campari, together with finger foods. Indeed, an aperitivo can turn almost into a little dinner. And Florence is blessed with many beautiful places that have glorious views onto the city where one can enjoy an early evening drink. A great spot for an aperitivo is the lovely Renaissance loggia of Hotel Palazzo Guadagni. And this is in the Santo Spirito quarter of Florence. You don't need to be a resident to enjoy an aperitif here. And it's a historic terrace, actually, that runs around two sides of the 16th century palazzo, offering really mesmerizing views on both sides, particularly lovely as the sun begins to go down at sunset. Architecturally, this is an important building because it was the first in Florence to have a top floor loggia called an altana like this, and many other Renaissance palazzi copied it, in fact. Another lovely place for an aperitif is Hotel Baglioni, which has really amazing 360-degree views all around the city, taking in the Duomo, Giotto's bell tower, which you can see rising here next to the Duomo, the dome of San Lorenzo here, which is where the Medici Grand Dukes are buried. There's a splash of turquoise on the horizon, which is the dome of the Great Synagogue in Florence. And then coming round, the views go on to take in Palazzo della Signoria and many of the other historic monuments of the city. Well, this is a huge roof terrace with pergolas and shady gazebos, so we can always find a pleasant, shady spot to enjoy an early evening drink. Finally, the fortress known as the Belvedere Fortress, beautiful view, aptly named. This fortress with the rather handsome villa that you can see there, they lord it over the south side of the city, at the very top of the Bobbly Gardens. And this is another great place for an aperitivo or just to enjoy the panoramas of Florence, as well as contemporary art and sculpture. Often they have interesting exhibitions either outside in the terraces or inside the villa itself. So these are just some of the many beautiful and historic cultural sites that we'll be visiting during the Academy Travel Tour of Florence and Tuscany next year, late May and early June. And I very much hope that you'll be able to join me in person then. For now, thank you for joining me online and farewell from Florence.